So hello everybody, thank you for having me. My name is Maria. I'm doing my PhD in Iceland at the Agricultural University of Iceland, and I'm very lucky to be invited to speak today. Yeah, it's an honor to meet all of you and to listen to your presentations and to be here. I have quite a few of my advisors with me today who are also speaking. So our main advisors are Ragnhildur Þorarinsdóttir and Sigríður Kristjánsdóttir, who are here, and then also my external advisors, two of which are Knut Jørnstokke and Karsten, who's just spoken. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And I'm looking into coastal planning or marine and coastal planning in the northwest of Iceland, mainly in the West Fjords of Iceland. And specifically, I'm looking into public participation and community engagement. And I guess from what I've heard, this is one more example of what is happening, maybe a little bit of a different take because it's very new to Iceland, and I will show you this in a second. The project that I'm working on, the main project is called COAST, or Sustainable Resilient Coasts, and I'm basically doing one case study of a few, and our partners sit in Finland, in Northern Ireland, and in Ireland, and it's a Northern Periphery and Arctic program funded project. And the goal is to collaborate to make specifically remote coastal communities more resilient in the face of climate change, and kind of give them and the local authorities in remote coastal communities sort of a toolbox or tools and strategies to work towards the sustainable development goals. And the three that I've put on this slide here are kind of the most important to me in this project, I would say. So both the reduced inequalities, climate action, of course, and life below water. And here we have the West Fjords of Iceland and where they're situated. So they're basically this northwestern claw that extends from the mainland of Iceland. And my case study is centered on that region mainly. And I'm mainly based in Ísafjörður, which is also the main sort of unofficial capital. And you can already see from the terrain that it is sort of riddled with fjords. It's also highly mountainous, so that comes with a few challenges. So I'm just going to take you through some of the things that characterize the region. So you can see a photo here. This is from Ísafjörður. A lot of the settlements are on sort of land spits or peninsulas in fjords, and the sides of the mountains are very steep that go sort of into the fjord. So very sort of specific coastline. Obviously, those villages and settlements depend on resources of the ocean. There isn't any sort of marine education program or marine specific program in any education or lifelong learning curricula that I've seen. So it's not a super political focus there in general. And the West Fjords do battle with depopulation. As I'm sure a lot of the coastal remote communities that you've talked about also do. And what I find interesting as well is on the right, you can see the ratio between men and women in the West Fjords municipalities. And it's kind of striking that a lot of them have a lot more men than women, which is something that I think should be considered. Then I'll just quickly show you some pictures of some of the challenges that we're facing. So for example, transport can be difficult on the roads, for example, in the wintertime, but also by air. So you can see the airstrip on the right here. That's Ísafjörður, the main town in the West Fjords, and the airstrip is right below a cliff. So a lot of the flights actually get cancelled. We're talking economics. You've probably heard that tourism is booming in Iceland, or was pre-pandemic, of course. You can see that mirrored also in the cruise ship landings in Ísafjörður, which obviously came to a halt in 2020 and are just kind of picking back up this year. Fisheries are still very, very important, but the aquaculture sector is booming, and that's also what's driving some of the planning activities that are coming into play now. I'll show you this very pretty slide. This is just to not forget how, especially this region, but Iceland in general, the main industries are really reliant on these natural resources. And if we're looking at tourism, for example, none of these tourists would come if the wildlife does not stay sort of intact, or biodiversity, let alone talking about fishing resources or intact fjords to even raise any fish in them in pens. Now, coastal planning is really new to Iceland. There was this new Planning Act in 2018 that first included sort of the need for planning of coastal and marine areas. And right now there are 2 pilot sites where this is being tested or piloted. And one is in the West Fjords, which you can see here in red, and the East Fjords as well. And the way they're doing is that there's sort of a regional council or group with 8 representatives and a consultancy group that produce a regional plan, one for the East Fjords and one for the West Fjords at the moment. Obviously, one of the main aims here is to reduce conflicts of interest in the use of coastal and ocean space. And I would say some of the main players here would definitely be the tourism industry, especially cruise ship tourism, aquaculture, and fisheries, although there are more, of course. And what is really interesting to me as well in my project is how capacity building and education and sort of by a stretch communication with the wider public is actually needed to make this type of planning sustainable over time. So why is this participation thing so important to me? This is obviously a really old theory from Einstein with the ladder, but I do think a lot of things kind of build on it or were developed from it. And it's still kind of handy to have a look at it and say, okay, what kind of participation is happening and can we evaluate some of that? So from what I've learned, participation is so important to have public buy-in, to have any planning be a long-term success, to legitimize it democratically, and to counteract some of the biases towards the powerful groups, stakeholder groups, or power hierarchies in general. And what the host project is trying to do, and what one of my key aims is as well, is to basically empower communities or local community members to take some stewardship of the oceans and to increase their agency. Obviously, this goes hand in hand with sort of this idea of co-creation of knowledge, whose knowledge is important and when is it asked for and how. And it should be somewhat rooted in local identity. If the plan is for the West Fjords, then the West Fjords local identity should play a role in conceptualizing this plan. There are a multitude of barriers, though, to participation, some of which have been even talked about today. So that might be just access to where meetings are happening, in what form meetings are happening, in what language meetings are happening, and if people feel that it's going to benefit them or even have an impact at all if they're participating, just to name a few. So these would need to be addressed by planning. So some of my research aims and questions were to look into it theoretically and find out, okay, how does community engagement and marine spatial planning or coastal planning, sort of how do they interact and what's the context in Iceland? I originally wanted to test different participation strategies with different community groups to sort of help this process along. I have stumbled into quite a few difficulties with this, because of basically the politics of the process that is ongoing and that is happening right now, which doesn't maybe lend itself too much for a researcher to come in and just, test a wide range of things that weren't originally planned for by the planners. And thirdly, I am working on a framework that's called bioregioning, and sort of see if this would be a way of framing the West Fjords as a bioregion, how that could maybe help to mobilize some of the local actors and sort of bringing them together to talk about some of these things that would be useful in coastal planning. For the Coast Project, I obviously looked at literature, but most of my fieldwork has been participant observation and key interviews with local community members and people who are either involved in planning or know about it or have knowledge about the marine sort of space up in the West Fjords, to just identify the knowledge gap and if there is sort of what this process is like, and how far does it extend into the community and into the public, and identify which target groups could be used and are they used and what kind of channels would be useful. I would also like to facilitate some workshop sessions, maybe some field days. There's a lot of different ideas floating around. It depends a little bit as well on the planning process itself. I am also working on a few other projects that sort of tie into that idea. So Just North is one of them that looks at similar things in Húsavík, which is in the center north of Iceland, which is now up to be the next area that is may be going to be in this coastal planning process. And we've run a stakeholder workshop and interviews in Husavik, basically to look at values and attitudes about the ocean space that they have there and what it means for decision making. And I'm just going to cut the other things short because I know we're short on time, but feel free to ask me any questions later on about it. But I wanted to share with you some of the preliminary findings of the coast study in the Westfjords. It seems from my interviews and from the workshop that a lot of people in the community actually do not seem to be informed or at all aware that coastal planning is happening in their area. It seems like the actors that are doing the planning are using a consulting strategy that works mainly without in-person meetings. Now, that was obviously also due to the pandemic and COVID restrictions for a long time. So they've used web maps and online comment boxes and things like that, where people can put in comments and also map areas of specific importance to them. Having asked a lot of people around it, though, is that it seems that a lot of barriers to participation are not currently being addressed. And sort of having evaluated that so far, it seems that sort of the strategy of participation is on a fairly low ladder, if you wish, if you're going back to that ladder. And what is striking to me is that speaking to people there, there's a lot of controversial issues around the marine space, around what should be done in the fjords, to the fjords, and where. And a lot of people are really keen to discuss it, and they're keen to involve, opposite opinions as well. And there doesn't seem to be a good platform for them to do it in order to actually impact on this planning process. So to me, it feels like this is a lot of this is important to the local community, but there's not currently a strategy to involve everybody, and that does end up with feelings of frustration, feelings of helplessness, and feelings of, are we actually having an input into this? And I do want to say that the setup of the municipalities and how planning works in Iceland is maybe a little bit different to what we've heard. There is this national planning agency, but usually most terrestrial planning is done by the municipalities, but they only have jurisdiction to 115 meters into the marine space. So that's very short distance compared to some of what we've heard before. So those fjords are, much wider in a lot of places, and the local municipalities does then not have the right to say, oh, we do want aquaculture pens here, or we don't want them here. So this has been, I think, also part of this frustration of the municipality representatives, that they don't feel like they have a direct say in it, although obviously they are part of the consulting group that is currently making the plan. So I would be really interested to hear as well about, I think our next speaker is going to talk about the sort of cross-municipality work, which I think will be super interesting for the Icelandic case as well, because Iceland doesn't have a regional government, but the plan that is currently being made is regional, so involves multiple municipalities that are supposed to sort of, have input, but also it's going to be effective for them. So with that, I thank you very much. I hope I was sort of clear in what is happening. And I invite any questions that you might have. Thank you.